We are in week 10. In this week, we will go over a new chapter, talk about arrays and vector. We will spend 2 weeks, including chapter 7 and chapter 8. After we introduce arrays and vector, we will continue to talk about sorting and searching. So the first thing we see, what are arrays? Arrays is one data structure can hold multiple values. In order to access the array element, we can access by the index. Sometimes we need to process all the array data, so we will talk about how to use a for loop to access the element from the array one by one. And in C++11, we introduce a range-based for loop. So that will be another for loop syntax we will learn. By end of this week, we are not only told you can process the array content, and sometimes we want to store different data type. So that's why we need to use parallel array to store the student record or employee record. So then at the end, since we learned function in the past couple weeks, we also can pass array as a function argument or return an array from the function. First thing, let's see what are arrays, how array can hold multiple values. So array is a variable that can store multiple values of the same type. So one thing you need to be careful is, we say array can store multiple values, but each array, they only can choose one data type to store. So sometimes, for example, we know how to define an integer variable. But for example, we have 10 students. They all have their final grade. If the final grade is only for the integer, so then for 10 students, I need to define 10 int variable. So that's kind of a lot of work, right? So you see here, when I declare a 10 integer variable, I need to do like this. So then here we need to define as integer. Then I need to have the I1, I2, I3. For example, you see if I have 10 students, I need to do I10. So it's kind of too much trouble. Actually for them, they are all integer. And they are all for the final exam score. So that's why we introduce you array. So array, sometimes we just need to define one variable, and depends on how many elements you want. I can specify 10 as the size if I need a 10 variable. So then I can define one array contain 10 integer data. So that's why we say array actually is a variable that can store multiple values of the same data type. For example, you see here, I want to define a test, for example, the final exam. So for here, earlier we say 10, right? So that's why here, let's do 10. If I want to store a place to store 10 student final exam, so each exam, I only accept integer. So then I just do this way. So the same thing, like you need to define the first is your data type. Then we have variable name. But before, you can see here, we define the data type and variable name, right? Then we finish. Or we continue, say we have 10 value. But here, after you define the array, you have the data type, you have your variable name. Then here, the very important thing is we call that the square bracket. Then you're using the square bracket operator to specify how many integer, you see, because I define as int, how many integer you want to store in the array test. So here, right, so I put the 10 here. So in the square bracket, when we declare an array variable, we're using the number in the square bracket to specify how many value I want. So then afterward, I define a 10 integer can be accessed from the test variable name. So each value, right, now I will define 10 value, right? So each value actually they are stored in adjacent memory locations. What does that mean? So then we see the next one. So earlier we say 10, right? Of course we can extend from the 10. So we just say, for example, now I just define 5 integer in the array. Okay, so if I do the 5 integer in array, so what I will do is, the first thing is data type. So then I have variable name. So then I have square brackets is the array symbol. So then in the square bracket, the number is how many elements I want. So now I define 5 integer in the test array. So in the memory location, what happened is, remember before we told you, right? If you have 1 integer, you occupy 4 bytes. But now since here we have 5, so then we make 1 integer, 2 integer, 3 integer, 4 integer, 5 integer. So then those memory location, each integer occupy, right, 4 bytes. So here actually I only show you one beginning and the end, but you know that in the middle they are all 4 bytes. So then here we're only using one variable name, refer to the beginning for the memory location. Then we have 5 elements. So that's the, again, be careful. This one, the int is your data type. Then the variable name is your beginning for your array memory location. So then you have square bracket. Then you have 5 specify how many element you want in the array. Yeah, so then you will say, okay, I have the test refer to the beginning of array, right? Then how about I want to access individually one by one? Very good, right? You have 5 integer, right? So you want to access them. So then here actually supposedly in this memory location, in those memory location, we should have value. We should have value. But here, let me show you also, if we want to access each element, what they do is, for this element, this first element, if you want to access that, we're using the array name, then the same thing, square bracket. Okay, but we start from 0. Okay, so then from this variable name, we access the first element. Okay, so even we say that's first element, but index start from 0. So on the other hand, the same thing. So let me write down here. So from the same thing, then the second element, that will be the test variable name. Then your index is 1. Then the third element, the same thing. You will have your array name. Then index equal to 2. So then continue. Of course, you know the last one will be, then we have 3 and 4. So that's how we will access each element in the array. So now you understand one thing is, here we call that array definition or declaration. You declare and define an array, name, test. The data type is int, so they have 5 elements. So you see here, since that's int, right? So each element is 4 bytes. So total in this array, I have 20 bytes. So in order to access the element one by one, I'm using the array name, start from index 0, then 1, 2, 3, 4, until the 5 minus 1. So if you want, can I define array in other data type? Right, of course you can. So that's why, for example, if we want to define a long double array, so then you just need to have your array name. Before the array name is your data type. So then your data type just specify long double. Then you have your array name, then you have your capacity or size. So each long double is 8 bytes. So that's why in this measures array, they have 10 times 8 is 80 bytes. So one thing is for the size we use in the square bracket, they either can be 5, 10, we call that immediate value, like the constant number. If you want to use the variable, you only can using the variable. You see here, that's int test size, right? If the square bracket you want to specify a variable, those variable only can be constant number. So be very careful. If we want to use a variable to declare an array, those variable has to be a constant number. So what is a constant number? The constant number is the variable you have the const before. Very good. So then after we understand array definition, then we have the index to access array element one by one. So the next one, let's see how should we accessing the array element. So when you're using the array element, of course, we can using a for loop or we can using array initialization. So I will talk about in the next video. But in here, this video, I want to show you, like earlier we said, you have your array square bracket 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So those things actually we call, you can either say they are index or we say they are subscript. So here that's it, you can say index or subscript. So in order to access each element, you're just using the array name with the square bracket, then with your subscript. Let me copy over what we have earlier. Then we have a test array. Size is 5. So that's why you see each element we're using the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 to access that. So you can either say that's index or here we say the subscript. So that's why here if I want to assign the value here, I just need to use the test 0 to access this value. So on the other hand, you see the example. Your array element can be used as a regular variable. So if I want to assign the first value is 79, I just using the test 0 equal to 79. So after I assign here, then they will equal to 79. So then afterward, I can either see out to display the 79, or of course I can see in to get the user input and assign to the next variable. So then you can see here we display 0 in the console, or we can get user input in test 1. So then of course if you want to add two numbers together and assign the other number, that's okay too. Because each array element we treat them like a variable. So here we see an example. You can download chapter 7 example 1. We just show you how you will accessing array element. So then like earlier we say, if we want to using a variable name to declare an array, you need to be a constant number. So this constant int number of employee equal to 6. So we declare an hours array is int array. So size is 6. So here you can see we ask the user to enter the hours for each element, for each employee. So the 6th employee, you just enter the value one by space. So after we get the user input, then you can see in one by one. Because each array element, they kind of just they work as an int variable. So then we can get from user input and assign one by one. Then of course, after you're done, you can see out one by one. So that's why after you run this program in Cloud9, you will see the result like this. We get the user input for 6 employees, 20, 12, 40, 30, 30, 15 for their hour. So those hours will be saved in the array one by one. So you can try to run this program in Cloud9 to see if you have your output. But here is how the memory location look like. See, we run example 1 in Cloud9. So we got user input and we see out. So when you run the program, you may not able to see how the memory happened. But here you can enter your number. So that's why they will save each element in the location. Then we display the output again.